Is the Nintendo Switch 2 worth it? A simple question with a not so simple answer. Because if you think about the original Nintendo Switch, this was legitimately one of the most revolutionary consoles of all time. But it came from a time of deep strife inside Nintendo. Because think about it, Nintendo were coming off of a horrible generation with the Wii U. They were really sort of had their backs against the wall. So they bet the entire company on the Switch by combining both their handheld and console lines together. And as we all know, it was a big success. But I would argue that ever since the original Switch came out, Nintendo have been running a very safe playbook. I mean, you look at the Switch Lite, which I would argue is still the best version of the Switch, but this was a smaller, lighter, and importantly cheaper version of the console, what they've always done. You look at the Switch OLED, same deal. This is the mid-cycle refresh, it's got a better screen, some slight tweaks, but really the same thing. And I would argue that the Switch 2 is another evolution of that. Yes, is it exactly what everyone hoped for? It's a more powerful Switch and they have a lot of quality of life upgrades. Absolutely. But if you're thinking about spending $450 on a Switch 2, I think that the answer of whether that's worth it is not as straightforward as you might think. It is still Switch 2 launch day. I am still very tired, but importantly, we are here in San Marcos, California at Creative Electron. Now, they've been very gracious in the past by allowing us to use their X-ray machines to take a look at things such as the PS5 Slim. Well, let's see exactly what is lurking inside the Switch 2 compared to the original Switch and some other handhelds, including the Steam Deck.
Okay, I'm Andrew. I'm an applications technician at Creative Electron.
Can you tell me a little bit about the machine that we're using? So this is a much larger machine than we've seen in the past, I think.
This is a TrueView Novus.
Can we please X-ray our Switch?
Yep, we'll close this.
Close the blast door. So these look like springs.
Yeah.
Oh, it's probably for the magnet to like detach the Joy-Cons. Oh, that's sick. So this little pin, as you push it, that's what kicks the Joy-Con out.
So these two are the actual connector.
And then to keep it from actually touching, that's what the springs are there for.
And that's a speaker, it looks like.
Oh, the fan?
Or the fan, no, that's a fan. This outer area is a magnet, so you can see the actual winding. That's super interesting.
So that's, for context, that's the size of the fan blade. So we are incredibly close.
Yeah, so they've actually done a really good job on this BGA.
Really?
This is actually perfect.
So you can see the heat pipe over the SoC running over to where the fan is.
Yeah, get in here and
see if NVIDIA did their job right or not.
Yeah, so each point is a different connection to all the transistors in the chip, and then going to a different spot.
Tiny.
These are like, you know, a few hairs.
Speaker, maybe?
Yeah, that is. Those are
my God, that's crazy.
individual windings around this, I would guess, a magnet attached to a piece of paper.
I have noticed that the Switch 2 speakers sound pretty good.
Yeah.
Certainly better than the original Switch speakers.
Oh, here's another interesting, this is a integrated chip.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
So that does not look good.
It could be better. It could definitely be better.
Oh, that might be the haptic engine. So that's probably where the rumble is coming from.
We're not getting a lot of X-rays through it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a solid chunk of metal. Oh, this is the battery.
That's battery.
Yeah, this is
the battery is small. It takes up a really small percentage. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we're gonna load up a Switch OLED just for a quick comparison to see how similar it really is on the inside.
So that's the Joy-Con.
So, so you can see, so that would be like the outline of the actual stick. There's really nothing that actually is mechanical here besides just the fact that you just slide it on a plastic rail.
Yeah, battery is directly underneath.
Oh, interesting. So it's a little different than on the Switch 2. I'd be curious to take a look at the cooling. Oh man, that looks so similar. So you've got the same heat pipe. I can immediately see there's fewer blades in the fan. It looks like it's a sort of simpler design. The speakers actually do look fairly similar.
It might be the same type of speaker, but it's actually thinner.
The Switch OLED and the Switch 2 are very similar. I mean, it makes sense. It's not like Nintendo's going to completely reinvent the wheel. In fact, even the battery looks like it's roughly the same sort of size and internal volume.
I even thought it was maybe a little bit bigger. Oh, this is the, what'd you call it?
The rumble.
Yeah.
Oh, the rumble's way smaller than this, isn't it? I'm really curious to see what the Steam Deck OLED looks like. Now, before you hit the X-ray button, you're not gonna delete my Baldur's Gate 3 save, are you? I'm kidding.
Probably not, maybe.
I'm seeing more layers, so you can see like sort of where the buttons are, the sort of plastic and sort of the membranes underneath it. Oh, you know what, this is the touchpad.
Okay, there's the speaker.
Speaker, which looks smaller than the
Definitely
Switch.
smaller.
Yeah. So I'm assuming we're looking at battery here.
There.
Yeah.
There's actually 2 batteries, looks like.
Oh, you can actually see the individual cells. Oh, that's cool. Heatsink looks similar, but a bit beefier perhaps, because you actually can see it's got like the clamp to actually hold it. I don't know what I'm learning, but I feel like I'm learning. Switch and Switch 2 have a lot of similarities. You know, it's clear that Nintendo have evolved the Switch design, but by and large, it's very similar. The Steam Deck takes a very different approach. It is a more modular design, it's easier to upgrade and easier to repair design, but it is also a slightly less complicated one. You know, you don't have detachable controllers. Seriously, thank you so much, man. This is phenomenally cool. It was really interesting to get an inside look at what's going on with the Switch 2, because there's certainly some major areas of improvement. I mean, I think the Joy-Cons are clearly just an absolutely huge quality of life upgrade. Not only are they physically larger, and they do have the mouse sensor, which I think is one of the things that not a lot of games are supporting yet, but the fact that you can just rotate it like this and use it as a mouse, I think is a really clever upgrade. But there is certainly a downside to the Joy-Cons being such a significant proportion of the chassis, because it means that Nintendo had to fit a very, very small battery. We're talking about a 20 watt-hour battery inside the Switch 2. It's understandable. I mean, if you look at it compared to the original Switch, they didn't want to make it that much larger. I think that that was the right call, because these are still very portable consoles. But if you look at just purely the battery size compared to its competition, so 20 watt hours on the Switch 2, 50 watt hours on the Steam Deck OLED, and the ROG Xbox Ally has an 80 watt hour battery. I will say that in my time with the Switch 2, battery is probably my #1 complaint. So we've run an initial battery rundown test. So what we did was we put Hogwarts Legacy on the Switch OLED, the Steam Deck OLED, as well as the Switch 2. And we got actually some somewhat surprising results. So the Steam Deck died after 1 hour and 56 minutes, the Switch 2 made it 3 hours and 7 minutes, and the Switch OLED made it 4 hours and 29 minutes. That is actually better than I thought the Switch 2 would do. However, there are 2 caveats I would add to this. The Steam Deck OLED was running on a custom settings with an unlocked frame rate. I think it probably would have fared a little bit better if we would have kept it on the default settings and kept it at 30 like the other 2. And I don't think Hogwarts is pushing the Switch 2 particularly hard, because just anecdotally, I haven't done like an actual full battery rundown test, but I feel like if I play like Mario Kart or something, I'm like 2 hours in, this thing's basically dead. Now, there are some real quality of life upgrades here. So the fact that you have an additional USB-C port in addition to the one on the bottom on the top of the Switch 2 is really nice to be able to plug in accessories and especially just be able to charge. I know it's been a little controversial that you have to use a micro SD Express card if you want more than the 256 gigs of storage built in. I'll say that it does kind of make sense to me, if I'm honest with you. The older school micro SD cards, while they're super cheap, they're slow, and the micro SD Express cards are significantly faster. I've seen some benchmarks where people have actually gotten faster load times on the internal SSD and the micro SD card than running it off of the actual game card itself. Well, this is a game key card, so that doesn't count. But if you have a game that actually has the data on it, which is something to talk about. Can I say one thing that has been incredibly irritating, that has not gotten better in so many years, which is, what the hell is wrong with Nintendo and online accounts? So if you want to buy a game on the Switch 2, there are 3 different versions. So you can just download it, you can buy a physical cart which has the whole game on it, or there are these game key cards, which is literally just a physical cart that just gives you a digital license. But on top of that, recently they've added virtual game cards. Now the idea is good, that you could take your virtual games and load them on a Switch, and that's actually something that runs on the Switch as well as the Switch 2. But I know that my wife and I both have Switches, and our online accounts got so tangled up and confusing. I legitimately could not, in good faith, sit in front of you and explain the absolute tangled mess of Switch online accounts. Now, I will applaud Nintendo for actually giving us physical games, you know, a thing that is very quickly going by the wayside. But when you compare this to something like the Steam Deck, it is laughably archaic. There is also somewhat of a side grade on the Switch 2, the display. This display is quite good in a vacuum. So it's 1080p, so it's much better than the 720p that you had on the original Switch. It's larger, so it's just under 8 inches. You've got yourself 120 hertz support, which is very lovely, especially in games like Mario Kart. You've got yourself VRR, which is great for games that aren't maybe hitting that full 120. You still got a nice, smooth refresh. And you do have HDR support. But it's still an LCD. And while I still will say it's a quite decent LCD, I think I'd still prefer the Switch OLED screen, even though it's lower resolution, even though it's only 60 hertz. And I would certainly prefer the Steam Deck OLED screen, which is not only OLED, but also 90 hertz. Look, if you put these side by side, I mean, you can just see this looks better than this. The contrast, especially, is absolutely no contest. And even though this technically supports HDR, I will say that I've been very much underwhelmed with the HDR implementation. On the screen, it doesn't really get bright enough that the HDR matters that much. Nintendo are doing something weird with the HDR implementation. It's ruined a bunch of our screen recordings. We've plugged it directly into HDR TVs and we've gotten horrible signals. We've had to turn on and off and it's very, very strange. Even with all that being said, I think that the Switch OLED actually gets brighter even though it's SDR. As of right now, I'm just turning off HDR on pretty much all of my Switch stuff. It does not work well right now. And especially when it comes to the internal displays, I get it that they wanted to make this more affordable because who knows how much they would have charged for the Switch 2 if it came with an OLED screen. But the cynical side of me is like, hey, they're clearly just nerfing the original Switch 2 so that we'll all go out and buy a Switch 2 OLED with a finally really good display in like 3 years. And that doesn't sit well. So taking a closer look at just how big of a leap we're looking at, we have the Switch OLED as well as the Steam Deck OLED and the Switch 2. We're gonna be playing the same game in all three, Hogwarts Legacy. However, I do have to say something really quickly. I did actually say when we were doing our initial hands-on of the Switch 2 that you couldn't get the Switch 1 version to upgrade to the Switch 2 and I had to buy a whole other copy. I'm just dumb. You actually can upgrade a Switch 1 copy of Hogwarts Legacy for the Switch 2. I just was unable to find out how to do that. Now, I will say that having played this game on the Switch 1, it is not great, but at the same time, incredibly impressive given the hardware. So we're looking at 30p, and I don't know the resolution off the top of my head, but I'll tell you, it is a playable version of the game. Unfortunately, what you've got with this version of the game are a lot of extra loading screens. So opening, waiting, there we go. And it closes that immediately because it doesn't want to show both. This is a serviceable version of the game. It's not a good one. Next up, we have the Steam Deck OLED. This, I will tell you, is a dramatically improved experience. So we're running at 800p, but it's being upscaled from something like, I think 640p or something right now. However, it is a much smoother frame rate. By default, this locks to 30p and turns on some ray tracing. Personally, I don't care. I don't think it makes a big difference. So I actually have turned off the ray tracing and uncapped the frame rate, which gets me something close to like 60 to 90. I mean, it looks dramatically better. The detail is better. My frame rate is significantly better. I mean, it shouldn't be a huge surprise, right? I mean, the Steam Deck is significantly newer and more powerful than the Switch. So when you jump over to the Switch 2, the first thing you'll notice is that it is capped, at least in Hogwarts, at 30 FPS. Now that is not the case for all games, so many games will run at 60 or even 120 FPS. Oh no, I can't leave because I have to return to the quest area. No! Wait, can I go outside before it tells me to stop? Run, 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 run! Oh my God, it's beautiful. Okay, run back inside. In the brief look of outside I had, it does look like to me that the Steam Deck is probably running on slightly lower settings than the Switch, but the Steam Deck, as you saw, was able to, once you uncap the frame rate, run at something close to 60 FPS. This is capped at 30. I think one of the bigger differences here, though, is in the screen quality. It's fine, but you could probably tell, I mean, especially a game like this, which is somewhat dark, the lack of contrast is very noticeable. Moving over to the Switch OLED on docked mode, it's funny, it looks better. It's certainly higher resolution, but the thing is, when it comes to the Switch, I always find that portable mode looks a lot nicer because you've got such a small screen that a lot of the imperfections aren't as noticeable. I mean, the jaggies and the sort of the rough edges are absolutely huge. Waiting for the door to open. There we go. If I'm being honest, it looks like I'm playing on like an Xbox 360. It's clear that this is pushing it far beyond what the Switch really wants to do. But let's do a little upgrade, shall we? Now, when you dock the Steam Deck, we are still getting the exact same performance, right? So this is a not completely locked, but relatively smooth 60 FPS. It does not look as good when you blow it up on a large display. Bro, I'm not doing that. That's my trigger's a little stuck. This is definitely a big improvement over the Switch 1. It's not perfect, but I do think that in docked mode, the Switch 2 should actually pull out a real lead here. Where in handheld mode, I would say that there's not a huge difference between the Steam Deck and the Switch 2. In docked mode, there is a massive difference. That's because the Steam Deck runs in the same portable settings no matter what. If you plug it in, it doesn't like crank itself up. But the Switch 2, it seriously steps up the performance when you're in docked mode. Partially because the Switch 2 has a tiny baby battery, and if it was running on these settings when in battery mode, it would probably last like 35 minutes. But on top of that, you also have, I would say, somewhat better cooling because I don't fully know why they built it like this. The dock for the Switch 2 actually has its own dedicated fan. I will say, just anecdotally, the Switch 2 gets very warm in docked mode. If we look at Hogwarts, I mean, the detail here, especially compared to the Steam Deck, is crazy. I believe this is running something close to 1440p, and while we're still looking at that 30 FPS cap, it does feel like if they wanted to include a performance mode, they probably could have done something like 1080p 60. It's not as good as a PS5, but it's not like dramatically off in the way that the Switch 1 was. I mean, the Switch 1 just like, it runs this game on a technicality. There are also a few random things I think are worth noting about the Switch 2, one of which is the screen. So, not the screen quality itself, but there's a pre-applied screen protector on the display. Now, it's not like a regular screen protector. Jerry Everything, he did an excellent video where he scratched it with like keys and like Lego bricks. It seems like it's an actual glass display, but then Nintendo put a very thin film on the top, presumably in case you shatter your screen to keep those shards from going everywhere. But the downside is that it is very easy to scratch. So I would highly recommend, if you're buying a Switch 2, to get yourself some kind of real glass screen protector. I'm using the Prism 2.0 from dbrand, who have sponsored me in the past. The Joy-Cons also are still very drifty. Now, I've not had any problems with my unit yet, obviously it's brand new. However, based on the iFixit teardown where they actually looked at like the part number and whatnot, it looks like it's basically the same design as the Switch 1. Maybe it's slightly more durable, they've got a little bit more sort of protection to keep dirt and dust out. I don't know, to me it feels weird that Nintendo didn't just fix this issue, which was quite a big one on the original Switch. Now, to give them a little bit of credit, they do have the exact same program in place so that if your Joy-Con does start to drift, you can send it into Nintendo and they'll fix it or replace it for you. But the downside is the new Joy-Cons are even more complicated. So you actually want to open it up and do it yourself. That is going to be even more of an endeavor than it was on the original Switch, which was not fun to begin with. Something else is the Switch 2 is very particular in what kind of docks it works with. So I've already tried this with the Switch 1 dock, it doesn't do it, but even a lot of the third-party docks, it just will straight up not work. So for example, we're using the Genki Covert dock, which is specifically designed for the Switch 1. So as you can see here, I'm connected, it works no problem. If I unplug the Switch 1 and plug in the Switch 2, you'll see that a whole lot of absolutely nothing happens. So most docks will at least pass through some power, but no video comes out. And we've tried a whole bunch of docks. So we've used some docks for the Steam Deck. I've even used docks that are designed for like laptops. And nothing that we have here in the office will actually work with video out on the Switch 2. I'm sure that more of these things will come out specifically designed for the Switch 2, but if you're hoping to use some of your existing stuff, it doesn't really seem to be working right now. I will say that Nvidia and Nintendo had done a quite good job of really engineering a lot of efficiency into the Switch. You're getting a lot of performance at a very low power level, but that kind of brings me to my main conclusion as far as whether or not the Switch 2 is worth it. Because if you're buying this console, you're either someone like me who was gonna buy one no matter what, and you've got to play all your new Mario games and your new Pokemon games or whatever the case is. We all have our vices. Is our Mario game a vice? Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna stick with it. We all have our vices, like playing too much Kirby. I like being a little pink blob and sucking people up sometimes. It's fun.
Sucking people what?
No. Nope.
Now, whether you buy it right now or in a year or two, up to you. I personally wouldn't be waiting around for like a Switch 2 Lite or Switch 2 OLED. I think that could be quite a while. And there are clear ways they can improve this. I would love to see improved battery life, first and foremost. It's acceptable, but just about barely. Same thing with the screen. The screen is good, but you certainly could see a better display in something like the Steam Deck or the Switch OLED. But for everyone else, if you're on the fence about the Switch 2, I would actually advocate to be patient. And for this kind of money, you can buy yourself a Steam Deck. You might be able to buy yourself an Xbox Ally or who knows what's coming down the pipe. We probably aren't too far away from a PS6 portable as well if the rumors are true. And the thing that really gives me pause before I giving this just a full cosign would be, I want to see more third-party support for this Switch 2. Now, first parties are always going to be the bread and butter. But for me, I play a lot of third-party games. And those games almost entirely run on something like the Steam Deck. Until I see when a new game gets announced and they say it's coming to Xbox, PlayStation, Steam, and Switch 2 on a very sort of consistent basis, I would actually say hold out. And if you buy a Switch 2 right now near launch, you're gonna be playing a couple of titles that are designed for Switch 2. You're gonna be playing a few more that were designed for Switch 1 that have patches, and just your existing Switch games. But I'm very curious, what do you think about the Switch 2? Do you think it's worth it? Do you think Nintendo are greedy for charging $450 for the console and $80 for Mario Kart? Let me know in the comments below. If you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go play some more Pokemon. You know, the game I've been playing for 3 years, but now in high resolution.